and we will try and answer them as best as we can at the end of the session. And you can reach out also to us if you need any further clarifications. Just a note that I'd like to make. I'm a counsel for Salesforce, which means that I'm not providing legal advice here. This is a training that we're conducting so that we're all better informed of what is expected from an ethics and integrity perspective in Salesforce. So if you do need legal advice, I would request you to reach out to your legal counsels and take it up from there. Great. Let's dive right in. Sorry. So this is the agenda for the day, as it is always. We're going to learn about, what is the Office of Ethics and Integrity at Salesforce, which I'm a part of. And we learn about our number one value at Salesforce, which is trust, and why it's important. Obviously, we will also dive into the supplier code of conduct, which is applicable to all third parties and partners. We will talk a little bit about anti-corruption and the other, major subjects which affect us and which we need to keep in mind. And when I say we, I mean all of us, including Salesforce employees and the Salesforce ecosystem, which you all are a part of. So I will take you through these and give you appropriate examples to kind of emphasize upon those core concepts. But before we go into the what of things, I always like to say that it's important that we see the why. Why are we doing this? Well, one reason is pretty simple, and I always like to start, from the business side of things. Like I've said on numerous occasions, I always bring this slide up, and the reason is to kind of drive home the point that most ethical is most preferred. In today's business world, where business boundaries are even becoming more or less transparent, and it's more of a global marketplace. Companies are there throughout the world, and it's been seen and it's been studied and it's been researched that companies or customers prefer companies who they can trust, who they see as ethical. And it makes sense for us also because, and I'll be talking about this as I go through, but it makes sense for us also at Salesforce because we hold a lot of confidential data of our customers, and they trust us with it. We have a 24/7 portal which shows if anything is affected and how quickly we can fix it. And we like to keep that transparency, which is our other value as well. So like I said, in today's business world, companies and customers do appreciate and deal mostly with other companies who they can trust and who they see as ethical. So there is a business reason to the why as well. Another slide that I like to bring up, and this was a study that was done during the years 2015 to 2017, and it has become even more important in today's times after a couple of years. I will be taking you through a couple of examples of how things can go wrong. But in this slide, what I want to show you and what I want to highlight is that Salesforce is a publicly traded US company. These words carry a lot of weightage from a legal perspective also, and an ethics and integrity perspective, and I'll explain why. But since we're publicly traded, I would like to bring this example out where it's pretty obvious from this graph that during that study which was conducted, and I'm sure more studies will be conducted on this, but at that time it was pretty evident that companies that are publicly traded and are seen as ethical and are seen as companies that do the right thing and do the right thing actually perform better. And that was around 5 percentage points better than others who were not seen like that. Now, 5 percentage points in a multi-billion-dollar revenue business is quite a lot. So that's another reason why it's important. Now I take you to this lovely heat map, which I have. These are not the places, or tourist attractions which I'm trying to highlight, but rather this is a corruption perception index, which is put out by Transparency International. It's an organization which keeps track of corruption throughout the world. Obviously, the red is highly corrupt, and the yellow is very clean, and you've got shades in the middle of red and yellow more than gray. So if you see the heat map, uh, where I'm sitting, that region APAC is pretty hot. It's pretty it's pretty red, and that is why regions such as this and other regions as well, which you see in red, and overall as well. I mean, there are certain heightened risks when a region is seen as red, and there are numerous reasons to this. For example, I think the latest example that I can give you or share with you from India at the moment is there's there is a news unfolding that last night the ex-finance minister of India has been arrested on kickback and money laundering charges. So, I mean, when these kind of things happen, it kind of raises that red, and it's a matter of concern. And why am I talking about this? Well, we operate in this business environment in these regions, and we need to be extra careful that there are risks which we face and which can come across. And during those hard times, we need to make a conscious decision to do the right thing, and make sure that we're looking at long-term impact over short-term gain, and keep this in mind. To go on, so I'll just talk a little bit about the Office of Global Ethics and Integrity. The Office of Global Ethics and Integrity, well, I report to someone who's a chief officer of Global Ethics and Integrity. She's called April Oliver, and she's based in HQ in San Francisco. We have around a team that is growing, and a program that is growing as well, and it's 15 or 18 people at the moment, and we're still growing, and we're trying our best to do the best in this in global ethics and integrity. Well, what do we believe? If you see, I mean, if you put it very plainly, ethics basically means the right principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. And integrity is basically doing what's right and being honest even when no one's looking. So this is what we expect that at Salesforce, with the Salesforce. And when I say Salesforce, I include the Salesforce ecosystem, which you're part of as well. And our aim is that we build this kind of an ecosystem where everybody's informed and everybody understands the requirements from a ethics and integrity perspective. And not only do you all understand it, but you are also supported. And we will share resources or numbers where you can reach us in case you have a concern, and we are obviously happy to address that. And we hope that like what we're driving, you make the right choices on behalf of Salesforce as well. Let's talk about our number one value. Our number one value at Salesforce, and this is pretty amazing because I joined around 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, and the first thing that I came across was if you ask anybody at Salesforce, what is the number one value, and they'll quickly say trust. And that is a kind of it's a small word, but it it kind of covers a broad spectrum, because how you build trust is extremely important. It's something that takes years to build, but could take minutes to destroy. So you're likely here in this training because you're, like I said, you're part of the ecosystem. You're a partner of sorts. We've either invited you as part of our ethics and compliance program, or or you've been required to attend as part of a mandated creation of your own compliance program. And it could be for a couple of reasons. It could also including be for reasons such as, like I said, you're present in a country which is to be deemed to be high risk for corruption. So if you're part of those red or orange countries in the regions, you may perhaps be interacting with government. That's another reason it's important that you're here. You may also be subject to the UK Bribery Act due to UK presence. So besides, and when I say UK presence, it could be that, while you're listening to me from a country in APAC, maybe you have, or your company has a presence in UK. And I'll talk about those kind of instances also besides the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of the US. Well, why else are you here? Like I said, trust is our number one value. We want to ensure that business activities are conducted in the right way. We want our ecosystem and our partners to act with the highest degree of integrity and comply with all relevant laws, local and international, whichever apply, particularly those prohibiting corruption and bribery. It's pretty clear that without doing this, I don't think we can succeed in meeting customer and stockholder expectations. Like I said, we are a listed company, so there is a cumulative domino effect of not only within the company but within the ecosystem. What takes place, there is an effect on Salesforce as it is a listed company in the US. And like I said, trust is a small word, but it covers every part of Salesforce. And we request you that you must keep trust at the top of the mind as you work with Salesforce and as you work with Salesforce customers. If any aspect of trust is breached, the consequences can be significant to our reputation. And there's an example. Last year, I think, there was a news conference where Warren Buffett and Bill Gates were being interviewed. And a couple of interesting things were said by the sage of Omaha, Warren Buffett, and he said that basically that, at the end of the day, reputation is much more important than money. And that is, I think, it's not that just that they have a lot of money and they're speaking about it. They're also not only speaking from a personal perspective, but I think they're also speaking from a company perspective. And he said that if anybody came to him, any employee came to him and asked him, whether they should or shouldn't do something, he would say, he had a simple test also. He said that, look at it this way. If what you're saying or what you want to do comes out is a front page news in tomorrow's newspaper, and you, the company, your relatives, everybody can look at it, would you be proud of looking at it or wouldn't you? So he called this a newspaper test, and the reason I'm talking about is that as to my point of the consequences, which can be significant to our reputation, one newspaper article is enough to kind of destroy trust that is built over the years. And that is why we need to be extremely careful. And one bad business deal also can ruin one's reputation. And the interesting part is that in law, I think all Salesforce partners would be working on a principal to principal basis, but at the end of the day, you are seen as Salesforce when you are interacting with the customer. Depending on your size and magnitude, you will have your own presence, but at the end of the day, when you're representing Salesforce in front of a customer, the customer is going to view you as Salesforce. And that's why it's important that you always act ethically and with integrity. What's the simplest way of building trust? Well, comply with the supplier code of conduct. Let's talk about that a little bit. So what is the supplier code of conduct? Well, you can see the key sections on the left. It applies to every third-party partner and supplier throughout the world. Obviously, Salesforce has many different types of partners, such as the SIs, the ISVs, the CRM resellers, and it applies to all of you. We'll address key sections, but before we do that, on the right, why is it important? Well, it is the glue that holds the whole ecosystem together, the partner ecosystem. It is a guidance tool. It is it might not be a textbook, but it gives you the core concepts that you need to hold yourself by when you're doing business with Salesforce or on behalf of Salesforce. Another interesting analogy would be that, and I always like to say this, is, if you've observed babies, it's around, this is like psychology 101. So just as an example, when you observe babies, it's around the age of 3 or 4. And if you can remember that, when you were younger, if you can remember that time, I've got a lot more gray hair, so I can't remember that time, but I remember my son when he was a baby. So it was around 3 or 4 when they start comprehending and the world around them. And it's interesting to note that it is at that time that, or rather even at that tender age of 3 or 4, when they start comprehending the world, they inherently know what is right or wrong. And then as an example, if you were to tell a baby, don't do this, I'm sure you know what the baby would do. That baby would, just go and do whatever you told it not to do and look at you mischievously and smile. Now, obviously, there's no malice involved, but the point that I'm trying to raise is that even at that age, there is a conscience within the baby, which tells it whether it is right or wrong and what it should or should not do. That is the internal compass that we hold ourselves, and that goes on through our lives. And I think, like an internal compass, if you reflect that onto a corporate entity, which in the eyes of law is an entity onto itself, you take the partner ecosystem also. Well, this code of conduct, or the supplier code of conduct, can be seen as a compass which points you in the right direction. So please do keep looking at it and going through it whenever you come to a difficult situation. And let's talk about why this matters. So obviously, it underscores our highest values and principles. And like I said, you are part of the Salesforce ecosystem. You are representing us. The customer views you as Salesforce at times. And thus, we want all of our partners to live up to these values. This is who Salesforce is. This is how we do business. And, this is how the ecosystem also should do business on our behalf. We encourage you to print it and read through it. I know at times, people think that, oh, it's just a simple document which says the obvious. Well, sometimes it's good to reiterate the obvious and keep things in mind, and it helps with clarity. And especially, it's one thing to read it, but it's one thing to keep it in mind in a difficult situation where where you need to keep these things in mind. The supplier code of conduct is attached to the calendar invite for this webinar, so you can easily access it. And for any reason, if it's not there, you can also publicly access it through Google. You can just Google Salesforce supplier code of conduct. It will come up. This means that the government, customers, other companies can all read it. It means the government will look at it as a roadmap when they're dealing with Salesforce and the Salesforce ecosystem. Now, why do you think we're doing this? We want everyone to know how we do business. We want everyone to know Salesforce's highest values and principles. And we want to keep building this trust. So it's out there, and obviously it's out there, so we want to abide by it. We want to make sure that everyone else abides by it, and we request you to do so. And importantly, what should you do if you see something wrong? Well, the motto is see something, say something. So if you do see something wrong, please, I encourage you to report it. There are various ways to report this, and we will share those numbers. There are various ways of doing this. You could do this anonymously, subject to your local jurisdiction. But it is important that you do it. And I will be talking a little bit more about this in detail as we go along. Um, Another important part is, the compliance certificate I want to talk about. So obviously you all are partners, and whenever you become a partner with Salesforce, as part of the contractual obligations, someone senior at your company who is authorized to sign on behalf of you is making a representation that they, as in your company and its employees, will comply with Salesforce's business practices in the code of conduct. And this is a representation which is made on an ongoing basis. And we want to help you understand that this is an ongoing duty, like I said, to be ethical. It's not just at the time you sign or when it's signed, and it's not only a representation, but also a warranty which is forward looking. So the bottom line is to always behave with the utmost integrity. And also, like I said, if there's anything wrong, please do raise it. Let's talk about anti-corruption a bit. Like I said, the global market, it's becoming a global marketplace. We're all interacting from a business perspective. There are local laws. There are also, because of this global marketplace that takes place, there are also laws which have far-reaching consequences, and also they do extend beyond boundaries. So the first time when I mentioned that, from a business perspective, boundaries are becoming more transparent, they're becoming more, open. I also wanted to say, or I also wanted to allude to the fact that there are laws which, we generally think that the laws of the land govern the people in the land, but there are other laws which, by virtue of you being connected to, let's say, in this case, a US listed company, those laws would also extend to you. These are called extraterritorial laws and extraterritorial regulations. So no matter where you conduct business for Salesforce, all third-party partners must follow anti-corruption laws. And the one that I mentioned is the FCPA, the US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, does extend, and it does apply to everybody in the Salesforce ecosystem, irrespective of the country you're in. And because of that, you must not tolerate, permit, or engage in any form of corruption, extortion, or bribery. This is true not only if you're working with government officials, but also if you're working with individuals in the private sector. And from an FCPA perspective, what does it cover? Where there are two main parts to it. The first part is that it requires accurate books and records, and I will talk about that a little bit more. But also the other part is the anti-bribery bit, which is like a no quid pro quo. So nothing of value can be given to a government official in exchange for business and or a business advantage. And why is this actually important? Sometimes if you're not in the field of ethics and integrity, or you're not a lawyer, or it's only sometimes that you come across these news articles, but is it really happening? So anti-corruption cases do make big headlines, and there are cases ongoing. They are expensive, and obviously they have a broad reach. I'll talk about a few right now, just to give you a flavor of what has been happening. Let's start with Microsoft Corporation. This company has paid around $24 million to settle, the SEC charges related to FCPA violations in various countries like Hungary, Thailand, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, and criminal charges related to Hungary. Right, so that's $24 million. Now, there's another case with a higher penalty amount, which is pretty famous, Walmart, the case with Walmart. So they were charged with violating the books and records part of the FCPA. And and they were seen as not having control provisions of the FCPA, and they didn't have a sufficient anti-corruption compliance program. And this was for like around the last 10 years as a retailer, when they experienced rapid growth. So how much did Walmart pay? When we say expensive, what do we mean by expensive? Well, Walmart agreed to pay more than 144 million US dollars to settle the SEC's charges, and approximately 138 million to resolve parallel criminal charges by the DOJ. This is a combined total of $282 million. And I'm talking, this is recent news. This was in June of this year. And the interesting part on this is that, when you're a listed company, a US listed company, and that's why I said it carries a lot of weightage when I say that from a legal perspective, is because not only can the SEC charge you with such penalties, but at the same time, we would have to pay parallelly penalty to the Department of Justice for FCPA violations. So if there's an FCPA violations, there would be two penalties which would come in, most probably from the SEC also and from the DOJ. And this is mostly in books and records is when the SEC comes in mostly. There's another example of Telefonica Brazil. They paid around $4 million as penalty for sponsoring the attendance of government officials at the World Cup and the Confederations Cup. There's a German company called Fresenius Medical Care AG, and this, they paid around $231 million to the SEC and DOJ, and this was for a global settlement. So I'm talking red, yellow, whatever on the heat map, to resolve violations of the FCPA in multiple countries. And this was, for violations which they did over a decade. Another case is, there's one in India also, the Cognizant one, which is they paid $25 million to settle anti-bribery and their officials. So not only does this extend to the company, but it extends to whoever is involved on a personal basis. So there are two former Cognizant officials, Gordon Coburn and Stephen Schwartz, were charged, with authorizing 2.5 million. And when we say charge, this is a criminal proceeding which was against them. So these are just the cases till date in 2019. So when we say, this is serious, it is serious, and we want to make sure you understand and what you need to bring to our attention if things go wrong. So let's talk about bribery and the US FCPA. Just give me a minute. Okay. So what is bribery? Bribery sometimes is often seen as, when we talk about bribery, sometimes we only think about it as cash, which is exchanged, but it doesn't have to be only cash. It's when someone gives you something of value, so for you to do something in return. It could be a cash, it could be a gift, it could be a job for a relative, it could be, it could be a quid pro quo arrangement, it could be a government official saying that, why don't you, instead of giving me money, why don't you give money to a charity where I'm sitting on the board? So it could be any of that. It could take the form of an oral agreement, a side deal. So basically, it's an exchange that is not documented in the contract. And there are different types of briberies. So, and many laws around the world penalize bribery where people are paying government officials to win contracts. So this is particularly under the FCPA, it is an interesting case which always comes to mind, and I always like to highlight, is the one on Oracle, where through partners, a slush fund was created, where the deep discounting was done at Oracle's end, whereas the partner would sell it to the government at a higher price. And this differential was put into a slush fund to basically bribe government officials. Now, like I said, because Salesforce is a US listed company, it is subject to the FCPA. And we are concerned when the end user is the government, especially in high risk regions like APAC, that was the orange, and the darker regions on the heat map. And however, not only are we concerned about government bribery, but we are also concerned about commercial bribery. So let me give you certain examples. Like of offering a luxury item to another company to win business. Suppose what would happen if you're taking a customer out to dinner? Would this be considered bribery? Well, generally, if it's not an extravagant dinner and it's internally we have $150 threshold per person, and subject to propriety, if it's not an extravagant dinner, I don't think it would be treated as bribery one off. But then something like giving a computer, this would be treated as bribery. Then giving something special to someone to get him or her to sign the net contract. So yes, so if somebody said that, hey, instead of giving me money, do me this favor and I'll sign the contract. So this is something you need to be aware of. What is the bottom line? The bottom line is we win business not because of bribes, but for best products and services, and that is what we're known for. So it's important that you keep this in mind. So what is the definition of a non-US government official? So why am I talking about a non-US government official? Because the FCPA basically covers non-US government officials because it is an extraterritorial regulation, and the US obviously has its own internal anti-corruption regulations for US government officials. So who could be besides who could be a non-US government official? Good examples are state-owned enterprise employees. So for example, I'll give you an example of a case that happened. Johnson & Johnson, and I'm giving you a broader example of cases not only restricted to tech, but it does happen all around. Johnson & Johnson a couple of years ago were held up by the DOJ for FCPA violations because their medical representatives went to doctors in China and bribed them to use Johnson & Johnson medical devices or products. Now, the fact of the matter is that most of these hospitals were government owned or government controlled. So the Chinese government actually had a stake or control over these hospitals, which in turn makes the employees, including doctors, government, non-US government officials. So state-owned enterprise is one of this where classifications where this could apply. Even in the government department, if we're looking at the procurement side of the government department, mayors, soldiers, diplomats, the UN, state-owned enterprises, like I said, Petrobras was one such example where over 100 people were arrested in Brazil. It became a big scandal, and for kickbacks and antitrust, cartelization, and they basically overcharged companies and created fake competition. So I think it's important to be thoughtful about who we are interacting with, especially when we are interacting with government officials, because the consequences can be immense. And like I said, it's one bad headline can destroy trust, which is built over the years, and it can put smaller companies out of business. I've just put up a kind of a slide on state-owned enterprises. These are APAC specific, but I'm sure if you're dialing in from somewhere other than APAC, you will also know a couple of state-owned enterprises. The one MDB over there, the one Malaysian Development Board, is now shrouded in a scandal going on, which is roped in the XPM. So we need to be careful when we're dealing with state-owned enterprises. So what do we watch out for when when you encounter anybody from the government or anybody from a anti-corruption perspective? What do we watch out for? Well, obviously, facilitation payments. This is a type of bribe which is used to speed up government approvals. Interesting case is sometimes, like in India, there was I think it was Reebok or Adidas or one of those sporting companies where actually they created, when they were audited, the auditors asked them in their balance sheet, they had this whole head or where money was being diverted to that, you know, one kind of, it was being kept aside as a fund. And there was no clear heading to it. And the auditors asked them, what are you keeping this for? And then they finally had to admit that it was for facilitation payments. That this is not what we want to do. We need to watch out for cash payments. If anybody asks us to make cash payments, if there are incomplete or inaccurate records. So remember, FCPA not only covers the anti-corruption bit, the anti-bribery bit, but it also covers the books and records. So the books and records need to be complete and accurate. Uh, Consulting fees is a very, very famous example where sometimes bribes are put into this heading of consultation fees, and companies sometimes feel that if it's a consultation fee or as a consulting fee, they don't need to bother about it, and they won't be implicated. Well, that's not the case. If it's being used to pay a bribe, there will be repercussions. Entertaining and gifts to government officials is also a very big one. Most countries, if not all, have certain regulation which makes it a obligation on the government official to take permission before accepting any entertainment or gift, or the alternative is that they clearly prohibit it. So personal favors, like I said, and personal favors surprisingly can extend to a lot of things. It can extend to even a government official asking someone to help them out with a school admission for their child. That could be considered as a personal favor to seal the deal, sort of. But so from our side, from from Salesforce's internal perspective, we don't want Salesforce employees asking you for gifts either. This is just not right. And if a Salesforce employee was to ask you for a gift or anything, to facilitate or give you a favor, kind of a favorable position, we would want to know about it, and you need to report that to us immediately. So, like I said, no kickbacks to anyone anywhere. We're especially concerned if a Salesforce employee is involved. No cash, no entertainment. You cannot. We have an internal procedure whereby a Salesforce employee needs to raise this internally for approval. We have a GEM app, so you would not have access to it, but I'm giving you information that a Salesforce employee, if he was, to receive also entertainment or a gift, we have a gifts, entertainment, and meals application, which is inbuilt in-house, and they would need to raise this to us. So if any Salesforce employee is asking you for any of this, please do not indulge. Please raise this. Please report this. And the important part is, many times I do get asked that, what if it's just a suspicion? What if you're not sure? Well, even if it is suspicion, even if you feel uncomfortable, you should report this. There are various ways of reporting this, which I will talk about. The bottom line, like I said, is, we want ethical employees and partners. And frankly, you are our eyes and ears on the ground. We cannot, be on the ground 24/7, but you are there. So if anything like this, for example, if a Salesforce employee was to ask you that, why don't you give me an iPad and I'll make sure that the next deal comes to you? you need to report this. This is extremely serious from our perspective, and we want to hear about it. Obviously, there are ways of doing this, and if you suspect anything, that's the number you can call. You can also like I said, subject to local laws, you can also report this anonymously. While I say this, if I do want to make you aware that if you are raising this anonymously, it's important that obviously it's subject to local laws. Like, for example, Belgium and France, I think, don't allow this. But overall, if you're raising this anonymously, we do need details, because sometimes, if there are complaints which come through and they're just, oh, X said this and asked for this or a laptop, this just doesn't make sense, right? I mean, we would need more information to investigate. We would need more details to kind of look into it. So please keep this in mind were you to ever raise a complaint. This is the number, and you can note it down. There's another slide also which has the resources, which we will get to in a short while. The financial ethics part of it is obviously, the business records need to be extremely clean. We need to do that from an SEC perspective because we're listed. They must be accurate and reasonable. And like I said, we are publicly traded, so we are bound to do that. We have stockholders, we issue stock, we have audits done on our financials. Everything needs to be properly documented. And why the reason I'm raising this to you is because it all flows upward right up to HQ, right? So even the ecosystem will, have that information flow going right from the ecosystem right up to HQ, where there is financial reporting done. This also means that there should be no oral agreements, so what I mean by oral agreements are, in the general parlance, they mean side letters or gentlemen's agreements. And basically what this means is there should be nothing beyond the contractual obligations. I'll give you an example. So suppose you have a difficult customer and they're not willing to sign and they're pushing it towards quarter end, and at the last moment they say, hey, SLAs are not up to what we want, so give us some kind of guarantee that the SLAs will be lower than what they are. And suppose this is not recorded in the contract but is recorded on an email, and that is something contrary to what is recorded in the contract. Now this would be a side letter, and this could have repercussions from a revenue perspective, and that is why it is not allowed. So no winks or nods. Whatever needs to be documented needs to be documented in a contract. And like I said, another example of things going wrong from inaccurate books and records is, suppose if a commission or something like that is, suppose a bribe is masked as a commission or a logistics fee or a marketing fee, this would be a typical books and records violation. If the US government, that is the Department of Justice or the SEC, were to investigate, this would be an extremely red flag, on a vague statement. So if any investigation was to take place and it reached out right to a customer who went through a partner, and your books and records would be investigated also. And if there was, suppose, something which said that, oh, commission or logistics fees, then there has to be a justification as to what was paid and to whom and for why and what, and how. So that all has to be covered. Otherwise, it's a red flag. And the thing that I spoke about, side letters and oral agreements, even if you suspect a fraud, a side letter or an oral agreement, I request you, please pick up the phone and call us. We will look into it. We do take these things extremely seriously. This is why I'm sitting in APAC. This is why we have regional councils in other regions. This is why we have a specific team that handles ethics and integrity. So we do want to hear if something like this is happening and goes wrong. So trust, like I said, is our number one value. It extends to third parties that you use also. So any party that comes into the Salesforce ecosystem by virtue of a contract like you, partner, or through you as a subcontractor or a consultant is, subject to our number one value and is subject to our expectations on ethics and integrity. And obviously, I think you have a contractual obligation that you must notify Salesforce before, I repeat, prior to use of third parties, you need to notify Salesforce. So this is what we request you to do, and this is a contractual obligation on your part. It could cover this when I say third parties, it could cover sub distributors or sub resellers, consultants that you use to identify opportunities to obtain business, public tender consultants. So all this would be covered. So do notify Salesforce before using such third parties. I'm not saying that it has happened, but the typical way, sometimes when things or when we're concentrating on business, we may need we might go ahead and get a third party on board and then tell Salesforce. That is not the contractual obligation. The obligation is that prior to onboarding anybody like this, and the reason for that is because they become part of the ecosystem. We become responsible in a way for them because, again, they represent you, and through you, for Salesforce business, they do also become part of the ecosystem and represent us. Let's talk about conflict of interest and what it is. And I'm just populating some of the examples. But basically, in a nutshell, when we say conflict of interest, it means a situation where there is an opportunity for personal gain or benefit that is contrary to the company's best interest. So, if you work with an AE at Salesforce and you give him a laptop or a tablet or anything expensive for personal use, what is happening is you're dividing our employee's interest from the employee to the partner. And this, for the employee, is a conflict of interest. So you need to keep these things in mind and be wary of them. It could be anything. These are the examples which could result in a conflict of interest. And again, if there's anything, like, for example, like the last one also, like working with a relative at Salesforce. If you have a relative at Salesforce, please disclose it. We have strict requirements on that where would it stop you from working with a Salesforce? No, it would not stop you. It would just mean that you do things differently, because perhaps we would assign someone else to work with you rather than a relative, because we don't want the relative choosing personal interest over company interest. And that is why please disclose if any of this is happening or has happened. Moving on, let's talk about confidentiality. It's an extremely, extremely important topic. Many times, these core concepts are there in our minds. Law is basically common sense. It gets complicated when there are violations. So let's talk about this for a while, and then we'll close off quickly. What is confidential information? Well, in common parlance, or it's information which is not in the public domain, and it is on a need to know basis. So I just want to talk a little bit about this definition, because sometimes that stamp you see on the slide doesn't necessarily have to be there for that document to be confidential. That could be used as a defense, but if the other party proves that information or that document is not in the public domain and is on a need to know basis, then it is deemed confidential. Somebody asked me the other day that, hey, this is information, and can I get, this is from an ex-employer, can I get it into Salesforce, onto Salesforce systems? And I clearly requested that person not to, and that person said that, but hey, Mihir, this doesn't say that it's confidential. I said, if you do a Google search, and this is not the, I'm just giving an example. So sometimes you have documents which come across on Google search. If they're stamped confidential, then stay away from them as well. But in this example, I told him, if you do a Google search about on this document, does it pop up? Is it there freely available in the public domain? And the answer was no. And then I said, then this document could be deemed confidential. So be extremely careful when you're handling confidential information. You may have access to aspects of our business model, such as pricing, products, and the structure of a customer's deal. And when I say structure, it could include discount and number of licenses. So it's never okay to repeat this to another client. It's the client's information. So again, this all goes back to our number one value of trust. And if you disclose such confidential data about a client, not only can partners lose their status as a partner, but we can lose our reputation. And it's very important to protect this. So be thoughtful, be mindful. I cannot emphasize this enough, that I get extremely surprised and disturbed when I see, people in the lift when they're discussing company information, when they're discussing information with regard to deals. And this is not, I'm not talking about Salesforce, but the place, I'm sure you guys also, when you might be in a location where there are other companies, and you use the common lift to go down or up, and I get extremely surprised, rather, where people freely sometimes discuss certain things, and you never know who's standing next to you. You never know who's sitting next to you in a restaurant or a coffee shop. Another interesting place is the toilet. Well, you never know who's in the cubicle, right? If it's a public toilet, you never know who's in the cubicle listening to you. So it is extremely important where you discuss such information. If you're meeting someone in a coffee shop, please be wary about who's sitting next to you. If there are too many people, I would suggest you don't discuss any confidential information over there. Things have gone really wrong when people start discussing these things very freely. So please keep this in mind. Confidentiality is on the top of our minds. Please be aware that do not do anything to divulge confidential information. Let's move on to the slide on on respect and social responsibility. As you know, and if you've dealt with Salesforce long enough, or even if you've just come into the ecosystem, you know that we value diversity and human rights, and this all comes from that the equality part of things. We treat everybody equal, and thus we value diversity and human rights, and we foster an inclusive and a respectful workplace, and we expect our partners who are part of our ecosystem to do the same. So think about it, that how you can have ideas floating around this. The more diverse, the better. But, not only is this the right thing to do from an equality perspective, from a human rights perspective, from a diversity perspective, but frankly, it's good for business, and it's one of the reasons that customers choose us. So do think about that. This is an important slide, so please do pay attention to this slide. Like I said throughout the discussion, throughout this training, that if you see something, say something. If you are aware of improper conduct, please, we do want to hear from you. Even if it's just a suspicion, we do want to hear from you. Many times, like I said, people ask me that, what if I don't have the evidence? I don't have hard copies. I don't have evidence. I don't see. As long as you give us details, as long as this complaint or is made with sincerity and in good faith and honesty, and with the best intentions, then we want to hear about it. We have an extremely strong non-retaliation policy that we adhere to, and this extends to the partner ecosystem as well. So if there's even a suspicion, you can reach us and let us know. Uh, you know, the reporting resources are the US Phone, International, Ethics Point. Ethics Point, what you see on the left of the screen, the salesforce.ethicspoint.com, that has an option for anonymous reporting as permitted by local law. So you could report anonymously as well. However, if you are reporting anonymously to the degree that is possible, at least, I would request you to give as much details as possible, because yes, we do want to hear about it, but we do want to get to the bottom of it also. So do keep that in mind. Before I go away, I think if the key takeaways are from what the key takeaways are, I would just like to highlight. Number one, the supplier code of conduct. Please read it. Please print it. It's good to have those concepts at the back of your mind. If there are any questions, we will be happy to answer them. Um, if you have a complaint, like I said, see something, say something, please use those resources. We will have future trainings, and we will keep on doing this on a quarterly basis. We welcome your other people in your organization who want to attend and hear this. It is helpful for them to understand our values as well. Feel free to offer feedback. We're open for questions. But lastly, I just do want to thank you for attending, for coming, and for hearing this out. It's important that we're on the same page as far as ethics and integrity is concerned. So thank you very much. We're open for questions, if any. Otherwise, we will close. Thank you so much for hearing.